Well, greetings. Welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. David Scott is a Scottish musician, singer, songwriter, and producer. He is the frontman of pop group the Pearlfishers and also a member of BMX Bandits. Refer to my interview with Douglas T. Stewart from last year for more on the BMX Bandits. Since 1991, the Pearlfishers have released 9 albums along with 8 EPs. Also, Mr. Scott works for BBC Radio, heading up music documentaries as well as helping to organize tribute shows for such luminaries as Brian Wilson, Ennio Morricone, and Serge Gainsbourg. He is a senior lecturer in the School of Creative and Cultural Industries at the University of the West of Scotland. Over the years, David has worked with many other artists as both musician and in a production capacity. Well, welcome, David.
Hello. Thanks for the invite to come and talk to you, Greg.
Sure. I just appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to do this. So let's go back to the beginning. You were born in Camelon. Talk about your childhood there.
Camlin is a small town next to another small town. I suppose Camlin's a kind of village next to a small town called Falkirk, and Falkirk is right between Edinburgh and Glasgow. For people who don't know Scotland, it's a small country, and it's also a narrow country, so you can drive from the west coast to the east coast in 2 hours. You can't believe that, but it's true. And Falkirk is right bang in the middle of the two main sort of central cities, Glasgow and Edinburgh. But yeah, a very, very kind of nice place to live, nice place to grow up, nice kind of mix of rural and urban. And the school I went to, which was St. Francis Xavier Primary, had a really nice mix of arts and kind of music and all of that kind of stuff. So and I suppose the other thing is, growing up in that town, I had a real musical family. Particularly, my mum's a good singer, but on my dad's side, there were really good musicians in the family, two of whom are still with us. My uncles Ian and Billy, who were fantastic musicians. So I think my sort of experience, my early experience, was very much of music and being surrounded by that.
Okay. Would you recall your early memories of hearing music being played in the household, either radio or live?
Yeah, I mean, it's like most people, it's kind of a mixture of that. Or maybe not most people. I mean, my uncle Ian would be playing guitar and singing folk songs, and we like most people had a record player in the house. There was a little dancette or one of these kind of portable kind of things that my grandmother used to hide in her house, and we used to go kind of hunt it. And there were really good records. The Aunt Veronica had good records, things like My Boy Lollipop by Millie, which was really fantastic records. Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom White, things that were maybe hits at the time. Where Did You Go to My Lovely? Those kind of things. So these little 7 inches would be a big thing, really, really for me. And then probably the other big thing is that we were church-going family. We're Catholics, and so really kind of every Sunday in my life it was kind of hymns and all of that. That's that. Whether or not you can continue to sort of have much of a faith or whatever, that music experience is quite formative, really, and hearing and singing communally is quite an effect on your mind and heart, I suppose.
Yes, I imagine it is. Yeah, and you hear about some of the gospel singers growing up in the church, and how important that was.
Yeah, not quite like that in Falkirk and Scotland, to see it, but nonetheless, but what we I suppose the tradition that I was brought up in was this very kind of folksy hymnal sort of warm Celtic harmony that comes from those things that kind of resolve perfectly, you know, things that resolve always back to the one chord, and with that beautiful kind of strophic kind of verse chorus kind of form.
Yes. Oh yeah. I mean, I enjoy a whole lot of the older folk material, the traditional material, you know.
Yeah, I did. I tell you, I did and again, this is one. I'll say this, if only that it'll maybe hold me to release it one day. Um, Before we made our album, Love and Other Hopeless Things, which was last Pearlfishers record, I actually finished a whole record called Für Kinder, which is an album, you know, for children, Für Kinder. And it was a collection of loosely themed kind of children's songs, some of which were my own, some of which were cover versions. And the last track on that album is just a solo piano version, no singing, just the piano version of "The Lord Is My Shepherd." And I don't know where I got the notion to do that. Why would that be on a children's song, a children's album? But in a way, I suppose it's just about the way that as a child you hear music and you trust music. And the Lord Is My Shepherd is about trusting something more spiritual or great. Anyway, that's a random one for you, and that'll keep coming back to me, and I'll have to release it one day now that I've said it.
Yeah, we'll hold you to it. Exactly. Right. Well, yeah, you know, when I talked to David Payton yesterday, one of his early couple of albums were heavily influenced by that old folk traditional style.
Yeah.
Robert Burns'
Oh
song,
yeah.
he even did the poetry, you know, to the song. So yeah, that's lovely stuff. Um, well, yeah, definitely you're gonna have to release that now that you brought that up. Well, so you talked about your parents, you know, coming from a musical household. Do you remember one of the first singles or albums that you got or someone got for you? Bought for you?
Yeah, it's probably a kind of combination. So the first album I ever bought with my own money was Pet Sounds, actually.
Okay.
And funny, I told David Hepworth and Mark Ellen that recently. I did the Word in Your Ear podcast, and they said, "Yeah, right, you know, you're making that up," but it's true. But it was probably that, and I remember my mum and dad going to town one day and saying, "Look, we'll bring you something back," you know, and I said, "Can I have a Beatles album?"
Yeah.
And they said, "Yeah, I'll bring you a Beatles album." And I was kind of hoping they'd bring me Sergeant Pepper or something like that. And they brought me Please Please Me, which was the first ever Beatles album. And, you know, I was kind of disappointed, right? It was that very early one. But actually, to this day, I would say if I'm thinking about my favorite Beatles album, that one is always in the top three. Their very first record, and their second record as well. Although it's different for you, of course, because you had all those kind of. For every 5 Beatles album, you had 10.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but Please Please Me with the Beatles. So Please Please Me was one, although that, you know, it was kind of bought for me. So those kind of things, and I guess, you know, you're grown up. I was born in 1964, so the sort of real formative music for me was around about that 1972 spot. You know, when you're just like 8, 9, you're almost as interested in music as you are in football or going on a bicycle or whatever. So a lot of the records that came out of there, so Roy Wood and Wizard, you know, really fantastic songwriters like that, Steve Harley, you know, all that kind of stuff had a big stamp on me as well.
Oh yeah, you're the first person since I've been doing this that brought up Steve Harley, but he was very influential in my musical upbringing, and
Oh yeah.
I love all of the Cockney Rebel stuff that he put out.
Oh
And
yeah, me too. Yeah, I mean some of those, you know, Tumbling Down and all of that, and Sebastian and you know, I mean they're fantastic records. Mr. Soft, and they're still very under. And of course, things the only one you ever hear is "Come Up and See Me," which kind of slightly annoys me. But I really love a lot of his records. Yeah.
and my friend or best friend at the time played Sebastian for me, and I was like just blown away.
Wow.
Just a great, yeah. I always go back to that when I listen to it.
Mhm.
Well, how about can you remember one of the first concerts that you attended?
Yeah, and it's so odd. I mean, when I think about the first 2 or 3 concerts that I attended, that I wouldn't want to go to any of them, right? But you know, so probably the first proper show I attended was a group called the Shadows, right? So you know who the Shadows are?
Yes, Cliff Richard's backing band.
Yeah, and probably the American sort of equivalent would be the Ventures or something like that. You know, so it's an instrumental guitar band. I mean, brilliant. Hank Marvin, fantastic guitar player, and they made great records. But I think I was taken there with a friend and his family or something. And I mean, it was so unbelievably boring. You could not imagine the how horrendously boring it was. In the Usher Hall in Edinburgh, and these 4 old guys playing instrumental guitar songs. And then the other thing I saw was, and again, why I went to this, I have no idea, was the Ian Gillan band in the same venue, actually, the Usher Hall in Edinburgh. Ian Gillan was lead singer in Deep Purple right? And I mean, it was one of those things when you're kind of in your teens and you briefly like heavy metal. so, so I went to this thing, and again, it was just garbage, you know. So I mean, I think I sort of probably convinced myself I enjoyed it at the time, but it was awful. But probably 2 things for me. One was that sort of concurrently when I started going to folk clubs. You were talking about Davy Payton earlier on, you know, folk music. So the folk club, the tradition of the folk club in the UK, really almost every town that I knew of had a folk club. So there was a folk club in Falkirk. There was one over in Stirling, which is very near Falkirk, very historical town. And my uncle Ian would take me to the folk club in Stirling. And I would go down to Falkirk, the Burns Bar in Falkirk, and you could actually go in and ask to go up and do a couple of tunes. So that's how I kind of learned to start being a solo performer. But you would also every week or every couple of weeks, whenever it was, they would have a featured performer. So you would see some really good, really seasoned performers, maybe not famous people, but they were on the circuit. They would come in and they could tell a story, they could sing the song, they could contextualize the whole thing. So that was I can't actually I can remember very few of them in terms of their name, but I remember the experience of it. And then the other thing that I saw when I was 15 was Paul McCartney, and that was in the Apollo in Glasgow in 1979, his kind of Last Wings tour, and it was fantastic.
Right. Yeah, I've heard the show he puts on and has put on for eons, it seems like.
Yeah.
Right.
Although if you look at that was the last part of a very kind of quirky sort of period, you know. So he was you know, massively famous performer, but the set list was pretty eccentric.
Yeah.
And I mean, at the time, it just felt like this is just, you know, something otherworldly, really. Anyway, so
Yeah. Well, even David, again referring back to yesterday, said he sang on the Mull of Kintyre, you know, track with, and he fond of that. Of course, that memory. Well,
I can't claim that, but
right. Well,
but of course I can claim
uh-huh.
having been on the version of Coming Up that was a #1 hit in America because it
Okay,
was recorded on that show.
there you go. See, you know,
So it
put
was
that in.
recorded in the Apollo in December 1979.
Okay.
And in America it wasn't the McCartney 2 version, it was the live version. So yeah.
Yeah, put that in your CV, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, yeah, of course you mentioned, you know, how heavily influential Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys were. I imagine, when did you get into Burt Bacharach?
Well, I mean, again, that was around about that same time, and I had my dad had that Portrait in Music compilation, and that really became my kind of go-to. And I mean, I've got a couple of copies on vinyl now, and it's one of my go-to things is that record. And so I suppose when a lot of my sort of contemporaries were getting into punk music, which I like too, I was sort of secretly listening to Portrait in Music, and yeah, I mean, it just such unusual, surprising, beautiful music.
Right,
you know,
right.
and yeah, and eccentric in its own way as well, of course. Yeah.
Let me ask you this: Did you were you a fan of John Barry?
Oh yeah. Uh-huh. In fact, the one of the first gigs I ever did was with a band called Second Nature, and there was this kind of club discotheque in Falkirk called Reed's. And I mean, this is not a London nightclub. It's a small disco in Falkirk, and we played this show, and they wanted to come on. We walked through the crowd, who were all wanting to dance the Frankie Goes to Hollywood, right? We walked through the crowd to John Barry's "The Girl with the Sun in Her Hair." I'll never
Okay.
forget that. I kind of slightly just put that in a song that I've just finished for the Pearlfishers. Just that sort of idea of trying to create kind of beauty in circumstances that are not necessarily that prepossessing, you know. So yeah, I love John Barry, and again, that's another kind of music that's on in our house here quite a bit.
Right, right. Yeah, it's funny how, like at the time you said, your friends were into punk and you too. It was kind of like you're almost a little embarrassed to, don't want to broadcast. Hey, I like Burt Bacharach,
Well,
right?
I probably got over that quite quickly, and it's one of the things that Douglas Stewart, because you interviewed Douglas. It's one of the things that Douglas and I have got absolutely in common. It runs right through the both of us, like a sort of as we say here, like a stick of rock. Um, I think both Douglas and I learned before we really knew each other to not be embarrassed about the music that you like, and actually to consider anything fair game. So if whatever you like, and you make a case for it, in your own heart, and you argue for it if you have to.
Right. I find with time I appreciate a lot of that music a lot better. At the time it
Yeah,
came out, maybe I wasn't so much into it, but with your taste maturing over time,
yeah.
yeah, I really enjoy. Well, yeah, it's sad about Bert's passing, but he lived a long 94 years. He was
He did, and actually he was active as an artist right to the end, and there's a lesson in that for all of us. We've seen him play three times. Once was in Lucca in Tuscany in Italy, which was marvelous. The best time was in Edinburgh in the Playhouse, where he had quite a big string section with him, and it was fantastic. Really really great. And even at that kind of advanced age, when he sang, it was really beautiful and quite quite heart stopping, really. So he never really stopped performing or writing, and the stuff that he did with Daniel Tashian towards the end, I don't know if you heard that. It was fantastic, really beautiful songs.
I have heard some of that.
Yeah.
Well, you're a multi-instrumentalist. You mentioned earlier going up to the folk clubs and playing. Was
Mm.
guitar your first instrument?
It was really certainly the first instrument that I taught myself how to play. I played trumpet at school, actually, or cornet, the little stumpy kind of trumpet. It's kind of mellow sounding trumpet, even mellower than a flugelhorn. It's got that kind of beautiful, beautiful sound about it. So I played that, and I taught myself how to play. My dad got a guitar, and he just couldn't be bothered with it. It wasn't like his brother. So he got the guitar, and I think he quite liked the pose. Uh,
Yeah, right.
and it lasted about 2 weeks, and then it made its way up to my room, and so I taught myself how to play guitar. Yeah, that was my first kind of thing, really.
Okay. You alluded a little to a trumpet. Were you a Herb Alpert fan as well?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I've got a couple of Herb Albert albums there. I think they become a little bit sticky for me, maybe. Maybe a little one dimensional here or there, but yes or no. I mean, who doesn't love Spanish Fly or Tijuana Taxi or any of these kind of things? They're real fun, and it's beautiful kind of sound he makes. I've actually got a Herb Albert. What I'm talking about, a couple of them. I've got a Herb Albert box set.
That's all right. Well, I grew up I grew up on that.
Yeah.
My dad's hi-fi. He would have Herb Alpert playing. And then also, are you familiar with Baja Marimba Band? You,
Is
you,
that the group that Van Dyke Parks produced? No?
I don't think so. They were associated with Herb Albert, the same kind of sound that's south of the
Right.
border. Um, I want to say the guy's last name was Wexler. Was
All
the
right.
was the head. Um, I can't remember right off, but very similar sounding. And you can't find any of their albums released on CD. I mean, you might
Okay.
have,
Right.
yeah, but they have like a best of. But as far as like the individual albums, I've been looking high and low for those, but real some really good tracks. But
I'll
then
try.
yeah, look at
I'll check
Baja
it out if I can. Yeah. Baja.
Baja Marin.
Yeah.
And actually, I will send you a couple of that I posted on my other YouTube channel. You can hear the pops and because it's vinyl, but that was the best quality I have. Well, anyway, let's let's was let's move on a little bit. Chewy Raccoon, was that your first band?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know what? I have to tell you this. I have to tell you this. I don't like it myself when I get a chewy raccoon. One time at a local restaurant, right? When I when I ordered raccoon, they had grilled it too long. I couldn't even finish it. It was so tough. So, so,
Stop it.
so I told him, I said, there's a right way and a wrong way to prepare a raccoon. And they did. It was just too tough.
It was to quote a friend of mine who was reflecting on one of his marriages. It seemed like a good idea at the time.
Okay.
And look, the story of that is that I when I made some, spoke to you about that band Second Nature I was in. They had the foresight they went into a studio in Edinburgh, a studio called Palladium, run by John Turner, who Davy Payton, your recent interviewee, will certainly have worked there. And this was just a local band doing a demo, but they had the foresight to hire a producer. So they didn't just rock up to the studio and work with the engineer, who was also very good, by the way. But they hired a producer, a guy called Bobby Henry. And I went along just as a guitar player and worked on that session. And I loved the way that I just loved the way that he worked with the band. It was the first time I'd ever really been in the studio, certainly the first time I'd ever worked with a proper producer, somebody who knew how to carve an arrangement. And I said to him, look, I've got my own songs that I'd recorded on a portrait studio at home. Would you be interested in working with me? So I sent them over. And that is actually what started my whole kind of life as a professional musician. And he had some demo money from Phonogram at the time. And we went into the studio and recorded a whole bunch of things. And by that time, I called the band Chewy Raccoon. God knows why, but it just sounded kind of cool. And I know it doesn't, but at the time. Anyway, but the thing was, it was very much a kind of art pop type of idea, which is kind of what my music is, really.
Yeah.
And we recorded all of these kind of, I think, really beautiful wee demos, in addition to the stuff that I was recording at home, which was quite experimental sort of pop music, and it was good enough, and it got us a record deal. Right. So we got a record deal with Phonograms, singles deal. It only lasted one single. And we recorded that song, my God, 3 times or something. Never got it any better than the demo. Okay. And by the time we finished it, that it didn't look right. It looked like a sort of really kind of mainstream sort of pop thing. I was in some ways really disappointed when it didn't work out. Of course, you always are. But I was relieved as well, Greg, because had it been successful, it would have been being successful with something that I wasn't connected to at all, Yeah. That kind of thing. But luckily at the time, I also had a publishing deal with Virgin, a guy called Kazu Tsunemaya, a Japanese guy who had actually broken the Bay City Rollers in Japan, right? And and he was a publisher. By the time I met him, he was a publisher for Virgin Music in London. And he signed me to that. And that actually kind of sustained me for many years. So whether I had a record deal or not, Anyway, so I'm getting off on a tangent, but yeah, so that's the story of Chewy Raccoon. Anyway,
Well, okay. So the music is a little dated, but it does show your penchant for melody and the early seeds of songwriting. I think that would mature with the Pearlfishers, later on. So after that came Hearts and Minds.
Mm-hmm.
And now the song "Turning Turtle," is that the Mary Poppins? Is that the one from Mary Poppins?
No, but it's not. The song was actually called Turtle.
Okay.
The title had no sort of relevance to the song at all. It was kind of a pet name I had for the song. And it was the producer, it was Eric Stewart, who you'll know from 10cc. He says, well, he said, we need to kind of, Davey, we need something in the title that people can relate to the song. So he came up with this idea to have, You Got Me in the backing ground goes turning turtle, right? And so then the song became Turning Turtle, because that's a well-known phrase, right? So Eric was good that way. He always had those kind of things. But again, the single didn't really do much. But the band and the recordings of Hearts and Minds, there was only ever that EP released, and there was I've still got it downstairs. This beautiful promo cassette that CBS produced with I think 5 things on it. Was it 3 or 4, 5 things? I can't remember. It's downstairs. Yeah. But the music that was recorded for Hearts and Minds was fantastic. And that's music that one day we will release properly, because it's worthy of it. And that was a great band. It was a great live band. We had people who would really show up to the shows. People who saw that band remember it now, I think. And the songs are yeah, I mean, I'm as happy with most of those songs as I am with what I've done with the Pearlfishers. So that's one that I regret didn't quite happen, and yeah, it deserves a wee moment in the sun, even if it's just for the people who know my music now. I don't care. I'll finish it one of these days and get it out there.
Okay, yeah, maybe maybe on the interim between albums, do something, with those. That would be, I think a lot of fans would appreciate that. Well, what was talk about the concept behind the Pearlfishers, how it all began?
Well, it all began because Hearts and Minds were doing well. We were still, even though we had a record deal with CBS that we lost, there were still labels coming to see the band, and there was still a lot of interest in what we were doing. We were still selling plenty of tickets for shows. And then somebody says, "Oh God, there's an American band called Hearts and Minds." And I could have probably dug my heels in, but I thought that must be a sign. That must be a sign. So this was about 1990, 91. And I just said, yeah, let's just take it as a sign and move on. And I always remember we had a show. There was a show that we're promoting in Glasgow, and there were big posters all over Glasgow with Hearts and Minds. And then we changed the name of the band before the show. So not a good career move. Anyway, but we did it, and and I think it's a great thing I say to people now with songwriting students and all that. I'm always saying, look, think about the title. A title is a great thing.
Yeah. Right.
If you come up with a title for a song, a great title for a song, it's kind of hard to write a bad song with a great title, right?
There you go.
Okay. So Love and Other Hopeless Things is a good example of it. I think when I got that title, I thought, God, well, I'm now going to write something good because of that title, right? And similarly, when I came up with the idea of the Pearlfishers, that I think really did point the way to the direction of what the music became, and it sort of crystallized that idea of the art pop thing. It sounds kind of glittery, sort of magical, aspirational in a spiritual way, I think, and the name, once I settled on that name, I felt, okay, here we go.
Right. I get, I don't know if other fans get this feeling, but I get the kind of a summary, ocean, of course, water imagery, and with the Pearlfishers, that's the kind of imagery that I've always gotten with that. And
There's a great story about it as well, which is that, and I've told this a number of times, so forgive me if anybody's heard this one before from me, but Saint Francis features a lot in my songs. Okay, so the figure of Saint Francis comes up time and time again in my songs, but it's not actually. So I went to Saint Francis Xavier's primary school, and obviously, and I went to Saint Francis Xavier's church. Saint Francis Xavier was not the kind of St. Francis of Assisi, because there's two St. Francis. St. Francis of Assisi is the one who would go about with birds on his hands and all of this, right?
Right.
St. Francis Xavier was a much more fiery kind of character, and he was a missionary and all that.
Okay.
And his first ever, this is a true story, his first ever mission was in the South India, among a group of people called the Paravas, okay? And you know who the Paravas were? The Pearlfishers.
Okay.
So there is that, right? So there is that. And I wonder to this day if I made that kind of connection somewhere, yeah. Anyway, so that was a bit of a tangent, but there you go.
Well, probably subconsciously anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, in the beginning, you started your own label, My Dark Star, to release your earliest material. Early on, I think you had more of a soulful kind of sound, especially on tracks like Sacred. It reminds me, forgive me for making this connection here, but reminds me a little of Hip Sway.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, that was in the air. Yeah.
Yeah, and a little of Cane Gang, is another one that
Again, yeah.
Appreciate.
I love that record. I think that funny enough, when on the last Pearlfishers tour, which was 2019, just before the world kind of went mad, I really wanted to do that one, and I tried to get the band to rehearse it, but 2 or 3 of them didn't really want to do it. And so at that point you just think no. But I think that's a good record actually.
Yeah. Well, most of your releases have been on the German label Marina. So I guess you've been pretty happy with that relationship.
Very much, yeah, and in a way, so when I first came across Marina, it was Douglas Stewart and I were doing a track with Norman Blake, and I just and I can't even remember the context of it. We're just doing a track together, and Norman said, "Oh, you should send you because I just finished the Tall Poppies music at that point." And Norman says, "Oh, you should send it to Marina." And I had seen a couple of the Marina sort of nights that had taken place in Glasgow. And honestly, I sort of felt they were too cool for me. I thought it was a really cool label, beautiful kind of packaging, and there was just something really. It was very kind of of the moment, And I thought, oh well, I'll give it a shot, and I sent them. And actually, that was it, 1996, 7. And they've been the sort of custodians of my music since then, and I've always had a good relationship with them. I think they understand music. They know how to put a package around it, and I don't just mean the kind of way it looks, but the way it feels, and the sort of yeah. Did
you see my interview with Chris Thompson?
No, I saw that you did it, and I'm going to go back. Chris, a friend of mine, and we've worked together many times, and I always love to hear him talk about his music.
Oh, very nice guy. And,
he's lovely.
And of course, with the Bathers being on Marina, he had some things to say about the label as well. But yeah, the imagery, the covers, they do such a great job with the album covers, and I think it really captures the essence of the music, in a visual.
Yeah. Well, Stefan, the two main sort of movers there, Stefan Castle and Frank Lanneman, and both of whom have quite multifaceted involvement with music. Stefan, as a pretty major music fan in the first instance, but also he's a really special graphic designer, and he's designed tons of sleeves for labels like Verve and all of that, and Polygram, and he's a very, as I say, a very special one-off graphic designer with a really strong signature style. And Frank is a really good writer. I mean, he writes about music and has done for the German press for a number of years. And yeah, they just have a sensibility that's very artistic and focused on the music.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of your earliest songs, here we refer back to St. Francis, was St. Francis Songs. I really enjoy. Do you still play that one in concert?
I didn't play it on the last tour, but if I very seldom do a solo show without doing that song. Yeah, that's one that's from the first Pearlfishers record that's not on Marina's album called Zaza's Garden, which is out of print at the moment. We'll look to get that one out again. But yeah, I mean that's a song that's very much back to your original question about growing up in folk. That song is really about that, and it's very connected to that for me.
Right, right. Blanket of Ribbons is a great track too.
We played that on the last tour. Yeah, played that.
I was going to say, because I see the live video is on YouTube, so I knew that you did that one in concert.
Yeah.
Nice reaction from the audience on that one.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those ones, as a musician, and people will say this to you, Greg, all the time, that you have songs that whatever your audience is, whether you've got a huge audience or a smaller kind of audience, these songs kind of become hits. They become the things that people really want you to play, and I can always sense when we play Blanket of Ribbons that there's a home for it, and it just connects with people for some reason. And it is about connection, that song, and it's about comfort or consolation or warmth or something like that, and people just get that about the song.
Well, another Glenn Campbell, another guy that I used to hear on my dad's hi-fi. That was one early memories. Your Wichita Lineman. Oh, that's just one of my all-time. I mean, it's got to be at least in my top 10.
What a song!
All time. What a song! And I hope you don't mind me saying, but Glenn Campbell's is always going to be the best version.
Oh yeah,
I do enjoy your rendition.
That was from a live radio. That was from a live radio program, actually. So it was a one-off kind of thing. And you hear Mick Slavin, great Scottish guitar player, in the middle of that, playing the low, strung guitar, gorgeous.
Right, right. And I have to say, I get similar goosebumps listening to your version. So.
Well, thank you. That's lovely.
that's always a sign for me, anyway, of a pop track. And then I also like your Snowbird cover.
Oh, it's a great song, and that was again from that same broadcast, which was like in a New Year's Eve thing. It's a great song, and it's funny. I'm not sure it's as well known as it once was. It was once one of those songs that everybody covered. Really, there are tons of versions of it, but yeah.
Yeah, I like yours a little more. You up the tempo a little bit. I like that. I like what you did. And you mentioned Zaza's Garden earlier. Sadness of a King, I think, is a wonderful track.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
And
I would struggle to sing it now.
What's the story behind that one?
Well, I think I'm pretty sure that the idea for the title comes from a Matisse painting, Sadness of the King, and I've always been interested in visual art. I went to art school, and I didn't finish there because I got a record deal and went away and did that instead. But I've always been interested in visual art and painting, and I still do that myself. So I think it came from looking at those Matisse sort of works. And again, a lot of my music, Greg, is about it is narrative, and there are stories in it. But it's also, and I suppose this is where Paul McCartney is such a big influence on me, just in terms of the way I try and make art. It's as much about aesthetics as it is about anything else. So it's that sense that making music or making art is about reaching for beauty on some level and trying to express that, And Sadness of a King is dare I say it, and immodestly, is a very beautiful song and a very beautiful record, and it has a it has a kind of sheen about it that is spiritual. And that's what it's meant to be.
Right, right. Well, I hear that a lot throughout your work as well. So, when did you and Douglas start working together?
Probably about that time. Probably just
Oh,
about after we made Zaza's Garden, and we played in a couple of bills with BMX Bandits. And he and I just always clicked, so from that sort of early 90s period, he's just been like a big person in my life, and he and I are like brothers, really. And part of it was bonding over music that we both liked. We're both mad about Brian Wilson and Burt Bacharach and Paul McCartney and you name it, 100 other things. But also just I think what Douglas and I probably have got in common is a level of commitment to making music, which and of course Douglas, is not open quotation marks musical in that he doesn't play an instrument. He's he's very musical in that he's got this connection to melody, lyric, and he also can conceive of musical ideas that are very sophisticated, and it's been my pleasure and privilege to be a part of that with him, and love the records we've made together.
yes, yes. It sounds like it. I mean, it comes across in the music. You can always tell an artist if they enjoy what they're doing, right? It
Yeah.
definitely comes out in the music. Well, from 1997's The Strange Underworld of the Tall Poppies. I always like that title. Very intriguing. I think it gets your interest, like you said earlier, a unique title, that's really going to, get people curious, immediately. I want to check this out.
Well, I'll tell you about that title. So this is by this time in my career, I had learned to not do sort of bizarre career moves. Okay. However, after Zaza's Garden came out, and we were touring a lot and playing lots and lots of shows and all that, and I sort of felt the band was not quite together. It felt like I think everybody gave so much to it and didn't get much out of it. There was just that. I think there were things were changing the band anyway. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll follow up this record that quite a few people really like by making an album under a pseudonym. I mean, it's such a ridiculous idea. And the album was actually going to be called The Strange Underworld of the Tall Poppies, and the Tall Poppies was the band.
Okay.
Right? But what it did do was it opened up my, creative space to make some tracks that I think I wouldn't have made otherwise. So you got things on there like Cherry Sky, which we would still do with the Pearlfishers now. Sugar Mountain Babies, still one of my favorite things that we've done. Lord Franklin, right? So that sort of Birdsey reinvention of that folk song. So there's a good 5 or 6 things on that record. Night Breeze is another one that were very much in my head. These were songs by the Tall Poppies. Okay. Right. And once that door was open, I started writing more, and boom, we had the record. And then I talked myself back off the ledge, and the band, the Tall Poppies, existed in the title only, and it became by the Pearlfishers. So that's. But listen, there's a serious thing in that as well. Sometimes, as an artist, you need to think about what your strategy is.
Right.
To make art, and sometimes it's pretending to be somebody else. Sometimes it's thinking, what would David Bowie do? So what I mean, or make the album that Judy Sill would make if she was making a record in 2023 and she was still alive, right?
Right.
So those kind of things are interesting questions to ask, and it might get you into a different headspace with a piece of creative work, right?
Right. Very interesting. You mentioned a couple of tracks that I was going to bring up. You're being psychic. Here's your showing your psychic abilities. Sugar Mountain Babes, gorgeous track. And it's shades of, to me anyway, to my ears, shades of Shelley and Orphan a little bit.
Okay, I don't know that, but no, but I'm going to be
with
soon.
Okay, the band.
Mhm.
Robert Smith championed them early on. I think the vocals and the violin is what is reminiscent to me of Shelley and Orphan. Yeah.
I'm going to go check those out. Yeah.
Yeah. Do that. And then I think They Met Too Late is almost like a part two of Sugar Mountain Babe.
Well, I've never thought of that. I like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. I'm now going to start telling people that was my idea. They Met Too Late again, and again, what is They Met Too Late is very much in that kind of 60s theme from a summer movie that was never made kind of idea, So if you think yourself into a kind of mid-60s kind of children's film foundation movie, we had that in England, in the UK, that whole kind of thing. Then you get where the headspace is and making. So in that song, I'm almost doing like a soundtrack to a movie that I've kind of been in, but yeah, I'm sorry, I'm thinking out loud here, but you know what I'm trying to say,
Right. I know what you're saying. I know you're going to that. And then you also mentioned your rendition of Pentangle's Lord Franklin. Nice rendition, I think. I like what you did with that one.
I met Bert Jansch a number of times, and I said to him, "Oh, Bert, I did a version of Lord Franklin," and he said, "What's that?" And I said, "The one you did on the Pentangle album." He said, "Oh yeah," he said, "that wasn't me though." And I says, "You're singing," and he says, "No, that's John Renburn." I said, "Okay." I said, "So you playing guitar in it?" He said, "No." He said, "I played the squeeze box in that one." Oh God! But anyway, but again, that's back to the sort of folk club thing for me, and those kind of songs. But that obviously version of it invents it in a more sort of, I suppose, impressionistic, sonic kind of way. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's always a good thing, when I don't like to hear. I mean, your cover of Wichita Lineman is very similar, but still, it's you doing it, But I don't like to hear, just copies,
Yeah. What's the point?
Clone copies, exactly, like you said. What's the point? And then I have to mention In the Darkest Hour. I think that's a very positive, life-affirming track. That's like a silver cloud, silver lining in the cloud, kind of a, track.
Another one that we did on all of the last run of shows. Yeah, that's another one that's endured.
Yeah. And I think the audience and your fans probably appreciate that one as well. Then moving ahead to the Young Picnickers from 1999, An Ordinary Day Out in the Suburbs. Yeah, tell me about the background.
That's a demo. The one of the quite a few of the songs on the Young Picnickers were demos that we couldn't really get any better, and that was one of them. And I'm actually, if you listen to it and know it's a demo, you can hear it a mile off. It's a kind of little daft drum machine and me on a kind of electric keyboard and all the rest of it. It's obviously under the spell of Gilbert O'Sullivan. It's got that kind of thing about it. I like, in that song, I do something that I do quite often in songs, which is use little bits of dialogue. So some of the lyrics, they're kind of descriptive or they're narrative, but they also could be and we'll be making love out in the suburbs in the blazing sun, which is quite an odd image in itself if you think about it. I may well opine our life is no, that's not the dialogue, but I'm thinking about, we will have a house and a car and a dog. Okay, so dog does not rhyme anywhere in there. It just it's sort of, an ordinary day out in the suburbs, hear the children sing woo woo woo. Yeah, I know you really care, so say a prayer, and maybe one day we'll live out in the suburbs. We will have a house and a car and a dog. You will call him Joe. I will call you sweetheart. We will have a ball. None of it rhymes. It's just like dialogue. And if it marries well enough with the lyric, you get away with it, but also it introduces something slightly different into the texture of the song. You know, they did that years later with a song called "The Umbrellas of Shibuya," and halfway through, I just go, Douglas, just think if we could bottle each drop of this feathered rain, package it up and sell it on to the farmers of England to grow neon roses on Salisbury Plain. So suddenly I'm having a conversation with Douglas in Shibuya railway station in Tokyo, and we're thinking about sending some of this vibe back to England so that neon roses will pop up. And, you know, so it's sometimes what you're trying to do in a song is say a very straight thing, like in The Darkest Hour, okay? Or Blanket of Ribbons. But other times you try to kind of create all different little layers of texture and moments where new things and surprising things can happen.
It's
So
kind of a little bit stream of consciousness. I think that works.
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I think that can work as well. Wow, it's like the author Virginia Woolf. You know,
I've not read any Virginia Woolf. On my list though, yeah.
It's kind of what she did, what she was known for, a kind of stream of consciousness. Well, the title track, "The Young Picnickers," reminds me of some of the great easy listening from the late '60s and early '70s music. I really enjoy some of that KPM library stuff. Were you in? Yeah, and going back to John Cameron, you know, the interview.
Definitely. And those movies, those kind of movie ideas I was talking about, it might be a movie called The Young Picnickers, you know?
Right. So you have a real knack for reproducing that sort of music, I think.
We opened a show with that one time. Once and once only, and I had a string section on the show and a couple of horn players as well. And I said, we've got to open with The Young Picnickers, and it was, the room was just vibrating with it. You know, to go up and open with an instrumental, a mid-paced instrumental like that with a quartet and all the rest of it, it was magical.
Anyway, moving to Across the Milky Way. Of course, you know that I'm a fan of Vampires of Camelot. Another easy listening type of a track. You know, it takes you back to what I like is, you know, these songs take you back to a simpler, a happier time, at least in my you know, and my psyche. You know, that's what I enjoy about those type tracks. And then I also like I Was a Cowboy. That's another one.
Yeah, I mean, that's another Falkirk kind of song, another childhood kind of song. The thing they've got in common, and if you think about The Young Picnickers and then Across the Milky Way, for anybody who's watching this, who's heard that music, they've got very distinctive melodies. Okay, so you can actually, it's really easy to pastiche easy listening music. Okay, so I could rattle out 5 of them. Today. Okay. But none of it really amounts to a hill of beans unless you've got a melody that's got something to give, you know, and some changes in there that will uplift, you know. So it is not, I mean, I love that comparison. But there's lots of music that gets made like that I think doesn't necessarily land, and you know, the Vampires of Camelot certainly does. It's got that. There's a bit of a substance to the melody, I think.
Yes. Well, you're not going to hear your music played in elevators, you know, too often.
Well, I would be happy if I did.
Funny. 2003's Sky Meadows. I think my favorite track on there is My Dad, the Weather Fan. And I know you've heard that from other fans, and you know there's a lot of talk about that song. There has been.
Well, I love that song.
Yeah. So that is autobiographical. That is.
It is, and it's another one that I think we probably haven't done a show since we made that record. I don't think we've ever done a show without that song. There's something kind of universal about it, and it's partly one of the things that, again, if I'm thinking from a purely songwriting point of view, it's really interesting to start with a quirky idea, all right, or a sort of odd idea that's very personal or very kind of, but actually at some point you have to think about the audience and what's in it for them. Okay, so My Dad the Weather Fan, I mean, it's a pretty odd title for a start, right?
Yeah.
And I remember at the time people would say, "Oh, you know that song? Could you play your song My Dad the Weatherman?" It's not about My Dad the Weatherman; it's My Dad the Weather Fan. And the reason for that is because of this little joke we had in our family, where my dad would be talking about how accurate the weather reporting was on the BBC. And it was just one of those kind of quirky things. And I would sort of tease him about it. And he would say, no, no, they were right. They said this and they said this. And then it happened. Then the sky opened and then it came sunny. One of those silly family things that everybody's got an example of something like that. And it just struck me. My dad, the weather fan, puts his trust in the weatherman. Always knows when the rains are due. Okay. So it's this kind of quirky thing. And if you stop there, takes a look at the window, but the snow doesn't work, gets a hat and some gardening shoes to tell the flowers the sunny news. See, if you stop there, it's just a daft song
Right.
about a wee old man that loves going out in his garden and trusts the weather and all the rest of it. But then you go across the sky, angels push the clouds away. I want to live in your way.
Yes, I love
And
that.
it becomes about faith and truth and defiance in the face of everyday storms. It just absolutely stands up to it. So I think that's why people who know the song like it, because it's got that, it's human. There's something about it that speaks to you.
Yeah, it's got that humanity in it. Yeah. Yes. Well, if your meteorologists are so accurate over there, I think we need to import some over here.
Yeah, I'm not sure they are. My dad's not my dad's not around any longer to argue the toss.
Yeah.
But if he was, we would be knocking lumps at each other. But yeah,
Because ours are so awful over here. I don't even watch the forecast because of that. They're wrong so much of the time. Anyway, Up with the Larks. Now, a lot of it has been said about this album. It's been highly rated, um, and it is quite an album from 2007. The title track. Talk some about where that all came from.
well, the okay, so I just for Andy who's watching this, who knows my music, that's my best record, right? So that's the best Pearlfishers record. There's other good ones too, but that's the best one. It's got the best songs, and it sounds great and all that. And it came from, I was invited into this, I think, a song house. These things that publishers put together, where they put songwriters together and you sort of go to a camp and sort of write like mad. And it was one of those kind of things. I was there with another 7 songwriters for a week, and we wrote. You were paired up with different writers in the morning and the afternoon, and I'd never done anything like it before. I hadn't even really done that much co-writing. But I went there and I did it, and I really enjoyed it, and I got tons of songs out of it, none of which ended up on Up with the Larks until the reissue, but I'll tell you about that in a minute. But what did happen was I just got this huge burst of energy in terms of writing songs. And it happens every 3 or 4 years, you get one of those where you're kind of just, songs are kind of coming out everywhere. And so there's a kind of energy and an optimism and a up in its toesness about that record. And Up with the Larks, obviously, it comes from that jing, jing, yeah, da, 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 yeah, da, da. It's it's like that Brian Wilson kind of thing, right? Almost like a kind of double shuffle or something. And once you're into that, even with a minor chord bed, which it is, you're never far away from something that's going to be kind of like uplifting and on its toes. And it's got all these big harmonic leaps in it as well when it goes up to the Love and the Storm Still Walk Together. So yeah, so it just has that. It was a time as well in just personally where I was just really in a happy spot in my life, and things were just fantastic. Life was beautiful at that point. And it just comes out in the song, and it's just about joy. And to this day, I think when we play it, like all of us in the band feel it really. So
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this: who did the cover artwork for that? Do you know who painted that?
yeah,
Colored that?
me.
Oh, you did. Okay. Okay.
And there's a story about it as well. There's a story about it which I'll tell you,
Mhm.
which a guy reached out, an American TV producer who produced a thing called Veronica Mars. I don't know if you
Okay.
remember Veronica Mars on the TV, and reached out and to the Oscar in Venice MySpace at the time, in the days of MySpace, because I do my artwork under the name Oscar in Venice. So some of the videos that we've done for the Pearlfishers, that's me doing videos as Oscar in Venice. And this guy reached out and said, "Love the work for that. Do you do commissions?" And I actually did a full size version of that thing for him. So there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, that immediately what attracts me to that. It's just, it's simple, but it's almost like childlike, but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I don't know if that's what you're going for, but
Oh, you're
yeah,
definitely primitive, and and there's there's all of the other little drawings in the package which were just done from sketches. And I was very much going for that and going for that kind of, yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well, it is effective. And now I have to ask you about the umbrellas of Shibuya.
yeah.
Shibuya. Yeah,
So I mentioned
that's
that earlier on. Again, that's another one that I like a lot, and it did come from the experience of being on tour in Japan. So a lot of these things happened at the same time. Douglas and I went on tour together in Japan, along with Stewart Kidd and Rachel Allison at the time, and we did this kind of, I suppose, hybrid show of BMX Bandits and Pearlfishers songs, and it was great. It was a great tour. Um, and we had just these amazing experiences. And if you've ever been to Japan, if you ever get the chance to go, visually, it's not something you really forget, not something you really get over. It's an extraordinary experience. So the umbrellas of Shibuya was we were in Shibuya Station going from Tokyo down to Osaka on the bullet train, as it happens, and it was Valentine's Day in Japan at the time, so February 14th, I guess, and in Japan, others will correct me if I'm wrong. I understand that on Valentine's Day that only the men receive gifts, and it's called Jiro Choco, obligation chocolate, right? And the station was full of these incredibly ornate stalls selling gorgeously packaged chocolates and all the rest of it. And it was raining outside, and was looking over the square, and all of these plastic umbrellas coloured going back and forward, and all of this bustle. And it was just like, wow, just like, wow. And that's where I took that line, from a conversation. Douglas, just think,
yes.
if we could bottle each drop of this feathered rain. And the song itself, there's always, that's another thing I kind of try and do in my songs, Greg, is to find little lines that are like little anchor lines. Okay. And in that song, it's "I was asleep, but I'm waking up." And it comes in 2 or 3 different points in the song, not necessarily the same point in the song, but that is the kind of thing that draws you. It's not the title of the song either, but it is it's the key line in the song. "I was asleep, but I'm waking up." So at the start of the song, it's 8:43 in the morning. So I was asleep, but I'm waking up.
Right.
And then as you go through the song, it's clear that something has changed in the life of the singer, and that's true. Happiness had come to town, as it were, and so I was asleep spiritually, but I'm waking up, and there's a counterpoint for that, or an expression of that in what I'm experiencing now in this place, and then when I sing the song, in the song.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I admire and respect about your songwriting is it's one thing. I mean, to not repeat, the same sounds over and over again. You're always recreating and making sure you don't tread on that same, notes and chords in sequence. Again, you're always, and that's really, something I respect really any musician to do that, and to not repeat that. But you're always, it always seems like it's so effortless. I know it's not. I know it's not. It takes a lot
No,
of
well,
work.
but that's what you're trying to create that impression, yeah.
Right, right.
It needs to be effortless for the listener. And in our group, you know, there's a couple of them, Gabby and Stewart, will often kind of say, how many chords are in this song?
Right.
And I realize it is harmonically complex. I genuinely don't think it sounds it. I think the melody leads it. It's always melody led, you know.
Very much so. It comes across in all of your material. One more track off of that I wanted to plug. Doesn't need plugging, I'm sure, but Ring the Bells for a Day.
Oh, I'm so pleased you mentioned that one. Nobody ever mentions that one. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that one's one that really immediately got my attention. And,
Well, thank you. I used to use that as a vocal thing for my students at University of West of Scotland when we were doing this kind of vocal class I used to run, and I used to just teach them that arrangement, sort of, you know, without the dots, just to do a head arrangement of it, because there's such a lot in the vocal arrangement of it. And that's one that I maybe wrote a lot of the lyrics separately to. Usually I'm kind of conceiving them at the same time. Although in this recent record that I've just finished, I did a lot of the lyrics first, actually, which is not a typical for me. But Ring the Bells for a Day was that kind of thing. So it was quite poetic. You know, it's probably a little bit more ornate as a lyrical construction than some other things, you know. Yet the starlings gather, salmon leap and break the spay. You know, they're not, you know, they're a bit, it's a bit flowery. And I think it's because I conceived a lot of it on the page, but yeah.
Yes. Well, let me ask you this. I was going to ask you later, but I'll go ahead and ask. Do you think that you were perhaps born a decade or two late? You were born out of time.
Probably. Yeah. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, because yeah, exactly. Well, you're championing the sounds and the music, you know, from bygone eras, but making it modern at the same time. So
yeah, I mean, and I think, look, I'm really, you know, I'm really connected to the craft of songwriting, and a lot of it is learned. Okay, so I've become a more literate songwriter, a more musically literate songwriter as I've gone on. I don't have really much formal music training, but I'm able to harness stuff that's useful, you know.
Right.
So whatever, yeah. I mean, it's probably true that a lot of the craft of it is maybe not the last 5 minutes anyway. Let's put it that way.
Right. Well, 2014's Open Up Your Coloring Book. You know, I think another one that's kind of has that imagery of a childlike innocence. You'll Never Steal My Spirit. Great track.
And that's one that I had written years before, and believe it or not, I had written it as a kind of Ibiza type. Okay, and I've got a version of it that I like a lot, and it's a song that, again, it's another one, if you take it back to things like In the Darkest Hour, it's another one that kind of just says it very plainly, and although some of my music's quite complex, there's always things alongside it that just, you know, say it really, really simply, and you get that sort of contrast. But Open Up Your Coloring Book itself is another one of those kind of songs, and I've got a number of them. Stella Painted Joy from the Young Picnickers, and Harrogate Bean and Bill from Sky Meadows, that are kind of multi-sectional things, and I really like that kind of, if you can make it work, you know, you take the audience on a journey, and that's when we played that song Open Up Your Coloring Book a lot, and we always play it live, and it's one that you can, the sense of journey for the audience when you come to that last one for you, two for luck, and mix it all up in a wooden cup, and it just stops on that at the end. There's a kind of sense for us as performers, and for the audience, that a journey has ended, you know, and that's kind of the point of the song, really.
Yeah. Do you find your audiences are pretty wrapped up and entranced in the songs?
I hope so, and yeah, and certainly when we play, doing doing shows, and we don't do that many, and we really should do more, and need to do more. But every time we do, the set list becomes a real thing. And in fact, Jim Gash, who plays drums with us, laughs now because when we were really first doing shows, I would always write a set list, and he would say, "Why are you bothering writing the set list? You'll have ripped it up after the third song," and that's true. And I used to just start. I would just start calling numbers, you know. Yeah. But now I wouldn't do a show unless I had the set list carved in stone, and it's partly because when you've got that amount of music recorded, people, you want to make sure that you're covering the things that you think an audience would want covered, but you also want to make sure that you're representing the journey of the music, and so that the set list itself becomes the architecture that allows you those moments of entrancement. So you maybe put something in the middle, and I would quite often theme little parts of the show, and I'll think, just let's think about this. Obviously, it has to work in a visceral sense live. You have to be able, people need to have enough to kind of feel excited. They need to have these moments of reflection, but also that sense that you've got some kind of thematic or narrative, something in the middle of that people can go on the journey with you. Right. So it's not just the songs; it's the soup to nuts of the set list.
Right. Right, exactly. I can see that and appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's your real craft as a songwriter and composer, and that coming out in the concert and the gigs too. Wow. Well, a peacock and a king. Now that's a historical context, right? For that song. There was a king that was a peacock. It was his emblem, or what was it? I can't recall that, but I know.
Well, you're telling me something I don't know. That's
Okay.
and that's good to know. A peacock and a king. It may be that image came from something historical, and I'm pretty steeped in folk music, so it may have, But the song itself is a bit of an allegory for. Is allegory the right word? Or it's a kind of veiled portrait of people that I know, and I used that to kind of, I used that to sort of vent a little bit, I have to say. So it's not something I do a lot, but it's and it's a kind of unusual song, really. We actually did a version of it when Open Up when Love and Other Hopeless Things came out a couple of years ago. We did a sort of recorded 5 songs with a small sort of acoustic setup in a studio, and recorded them, filmed them really beautifully, and they went out as little kind of things for the album. And a peacock and a king was among them. And it's not something I'd ever really think about doing live, but in that controlled environment, we're able to control the vocals and get it there.
Yeah, I like the imagery in that one as well. The I Don't Want to Know About It. That's another one I would pick off of that album.
Written with Erin Moran, aka A Girl Called Eddie.
Okay.
And that's, if you don't know Erin or her music, you would absolutely love it. She's another special talent, really.
Okay. I will look into her for sure. And then finally, Her Heart Moves Like the Sea Moves. Yeah, I love that title.
So that is a story, and it's one that I play often, and it's it's a very real story. A friend of mine became a Catholic priest, a guy called Jerry McGarvey, very dear old friend of mine, and I went through a lot of it with him. I don't mean, obviously I wasn't in the seminary and all that, but when he did his various stages, to his, what you call the first profession and the second profession, as he was going to become a priest, I would always be there and sort of watching all. And I was there when he was ordained, and it didn't sort of ultimately work out for him, although I think he's somebody who's somebody who's always been in service of other people. I think he is that to this day. So anyway, that's the kind of start of it.
Mhm.
And I always think I'm interested in that story. It's a big, big, big story. They say somebody, there was a mission in Falkirk where these priests came and inspired all these young kids. One of them went away, became a priest, didn't work out for him, he left, all that kind of stuff. There's a massive story. I thought it's too big a story to tell in a song. So what I did, and I think this is another songwriting thing that is actually a good narrative thing. I thought, well, what is the lens on that story, and what is the tiny little bit of it that we need to see? So I told the story from the perspective of his mother, Grace McGarvey, who's no longer with us. She was a fantastic woman. So the story is told from her perspective, okay. And the underlying kind of image of it is her heart moves like the sea moves. So in, out, and that's about constancy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's about the kind of the spine that holds us together. So the sea, the moon, the air, the sun, all that kind of stuff is the kind of center of it. So all of these events are happening, but her heart moves like the sea moves. And there's something there that you can trust. And the music does that in the song. The music, because has got that to and fro motion. So you set that up, that kind of to fro motion, the kind of feel of it, and the image of it, and that tiny lens, and you just tell the story.
Right, kind of like a tidal motion. Yeah. It's really, really nice. That might make a good movie too. That whole story, you saw it.
I bet.
Too epic, but
I bet it would. There's another one as well. There's a song on Up with Larks called "London's in Love," and a pal of mine said, "I mean, that is a kind of a Hugh Grant rom-com waiting to be made, isn't it? London's in Love."
Right. It could be.
Yeah,
It could be.
Anyway, yeah.
Well, you mentioned London. Moving on to 2019's "Love and Other Hopeless Things." Once I lived in London. Now that's got to be about you, right?
Well, it's about two people. Again, I'm not sure if you know the writer Bill Demain. Bill, who is a writer more than one way or another. Bill writes for Mojo and all sorts of kind of music publications. He's an artist in his own right with a band called Swan Dive.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Bill and I wrote that song together, and actually it started off as a lyric by Bill. So most of the opening of that, "Once I lived in London," right near the Vauxhall Bridge, in a room on a corner the size of a fridge, a bed, a desk, a window. So that's his start. That was the starting point of it, and then the rest of it we kind of to and froed, and so it's partly his experience as a young guy living in London. But it's mine too, and the stuff that I added, the stuff about busking and Spandau Ballet's true and all that. I'm not. That's not to say, well, he wrote that line and I wrote that line, but just to illustrate that actually it was about two different experiences that actually sort of cohered. We think, God, we were living the same life. Well, years before we knew each other as friends, there was all that life, and yeah. And there's, because of that, I think there's a certain kind of heart and soul to that song that really comes out. And there's a number of different. I cut maybe 3 or 4 different versions of it, and could never get it right. And then what I did was I took tiny elements of the very first demo, okay, and just grafted them on to a very simple guitar recording of it, and then put on the real string section and a tiny little bit of drums in the middle, and boom, there it was. And sometimes it's funny, the days are gone when I used to record multiple versions of the same song, 4 demos before and that was a real common practice back in the day. I tend to really record a piano vocal version of something, and then I just cut it the way I want to cut it. But once I lived in London, it went through a couple of versions. And Swan Dive did a beautiful version of it as well. But there was something in the early demo of it that I did there were these kind of fake strings that they're in there under the real strings. There was something about the spirit of it, and that thing when you try to record things, sometimes you are looking for perfection, technical perfection, but also sometimes you want that little bit of something that's kind of a bit wobbly or just slightly not quite right, and it gives it, it just kind of makes it intriguing.
Yeah, yes, I think so. So much of your lyrics, I mean, they evoke these images, and this is one of the songs, I mean, I can be there. And I think that's a great quality of a song, a songwriter. And then
I
along
was
with
thinking,
music, then you put the music to it, and it just adds that other element, and it puts you there. I mean, you can go through what the songwriter, takes you through this whole story, and
yeah.
it's really vivid on most of your songs. It's a very vivid image that
Well, thank you. I love that song, and it's one that yeah, it's one that I keep returning to in my head.
And you have a good way of balancing out all of the elements. I got to say this too. You don't overuse any one instrument, and I think it's just all well balanced, and that's got to be, I couldn't do it. I know
It's
it.
partly Greg. It's partly art school training, and this is a funny thing. One of the things that you are taught, I think, when you work in visual art or you get any sort of training, whatever level you're at, is that you have to create space. So
Right.
probably I spend more time when I'm mixing music taking things out than adding things, and I'm also always adding things, but it's particularly when you get to the very end stages of making an album, you're probably saying, you know what, I'm actually going to take the drums out of. I just recorded a song with drums, bass, 3 electric guitars, 4 tracks of acoustic, strings, horns, glockenspiels, tambourine, everything, backing vocals, and I took everything off it apart from the string section, the vocal, and the guitar, the
Yeah.
acoustic guitar, just everything.
Right.
And it's about making those kind of big calls at the end.
Right. Right. Yeah. Have you thought about using oboe a little bit more in your trying? Maybe you have to find an oboe player.
You've been speaking to Stephen Castle at Marina. He's always saying that. What about flutes and oboes? I used more kind of woods on Across the Milky Way. In fact, I used a lot of bass clarinet. What an instrument that is on Across the Milky Way, and a little bit of clarinet. But no, something. It doesn't really occur to me. It's a beautiful instrument. Yeah.
Yeah. And another one I heard, one of your tracks was the harpsichord. I've always liked that.
I love harpsichord. It's difficult. It's one of those things you can get a sampled harpsichord that is the most accurate sample of all time, and it sounds like a sample. And
Yeah.
so you have to really work to make it sound good. Or on the other hand, hire a harpsichord, which is a fortune.
Right, right. Well, talk about the title track, "Love and Other Hopeless Things." That's a great, wonderful.
So I can talk about it, and it's got a very specific story, and that story is that I had a dream that George Martin phoned me, the Beatles producer George Martin.
Uh-huh.
And I met George Martin in the 1980s and interacted with him a number of times, and he was a marvelous person to meet. In my dream, he phoned up and said, "Davey, we're putting Cilla Black back in the studio, and we're going to." Do you know who Cilla Black is? She didn't really
Yeah.
land
Yeah.
over the pond, but anyway. But we're going to put her back in the studio, and we're going to record just like we did in the 60s at Abbey Road. And he said in the dream, "If you get any songs." So yeah, I mean so that is the song that I would have written for Cilla if she had been making that record, right? So next time you listen to it, think of it as a Cilla Black record from 1966, okay? And think yourself into that. And the person in the middle of the song is Cilla. So another foggy Monday morning, sail the ferry to town, that's the Mersey ferry, and think of all the people's dreams. Like Bodicea in blue stockings on a dress down day. Well, you're going to dress up anyway. And she's going to her work as a hat check girl in the cavern. Okay. And I made a video for that song in kind of in the style of the Czech illustrator Miroslav Sezek, nowhere near his standard, but nonetheless, I made a nice little video for it. And Scylla is personified in that video, and she's in Liverpool, and there's all these kind of Liverpool sort of references in the video. So you go and have a listen to that. But it's a song I'm really fond of, but it has got a real rich hinterland.
Yeah, I wanted to. I've got a box set. Here we go.
Well, there you go.
Of her first, I think it's first 5 albums. Yeah.
Amazing. And she does that amazing John Cameron song, doesn't she? If I thought you'd ever change mind.
Yeah. Yes, and he mentioned that in the interview too. I knew I had that here handy. I wanted to, but yeah, I've been a big fan of hers for a long.
So again, and it's one of those things again, as a songwriter, sometimes it is about thinking your way into something in a slightly different way. So if Scylla was still alive, and if George was still alive, and I had the chance to do that, what would I do? And it would have been a great Scylla Black record.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So next time, let's listen to it, and it just gets you. It gets you out of just sitting at the piano or the guitar doing something, and suddenly you're in a different space, and suddenly you can just go a 180 degree in what it is you are, or who you are, even at that moment.
Right. Very, very well said. And then one last track, One for the Bairns. I like also off of that one.
Thank you. Well, the Bairns is the nickname for Falkirk Football Club.
Oh, okay.
So actually, that song got started. I was a guest, and there's a football show here called Off the Ball, and Falkirk, we were a relatively small team. We're in the Scottish Cup final, and they invited me on the show, and they asked me to write a song on air, and so I wrote this kind of thing, and it had that sort of trogs ba thing on it. Yeah. And I actually quite liked it. So then I went away and I wrote it into a song, and One for the Bairns. And in Scotland, Bairns means babies, children.
Okay.
So Bairns, it would be one for children, so song for children, but also had the double meaning.
There you go. Double entendre. Yeah. Well, what is let me ask you this. What is a kirk?
A kirk is a church.
There you go. Ding, ding, ding. Good answer. I work crosswords to try to keep my mind.
Yeah.
And that was one. What is the name of the Scottish church? So yeah.
Kirk, yeah.
I just did that one. Well, let's move on. Talk a little bit, because I like these to be kind of all encompassing as much as possible, without being too epic in scope. But I did want to ask you a little bit about your BBC broadcasting, in particular the documentaries that you've handled. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's something that just came up, and I guess when and it's when you're around and in the culture a little bit, and you sort of people get to know you, and I suppose people think, well, you can talk a bit, and so you're getting invited on to talk about your own music or whatever. And there's a guy called Stewart Cruikshank, who is a big figure in my life, sadly no longer with us. Asked me to go and present a radio program and see how I got on. And that was around about I'm going to say 2001, something like that, maybe the year 2000, something like that. And that started me off in a sort of career as a radio broadcaster that sort of carried on to this day. But I moved out of presenting live disc shows or live chat shows or whatever, which I did a lot of, and started making programs about things that I'm really interested in, like movie soundtracks and lyrics, and the most enduring of them all has been this series called Classic Scottish Albums, where we do a sort of feature, usually about half-hour length, on a classic Scottish album, and there's about 50 odd episodes up now. On the unfortunately, you can't really hear most of them over the pond because of copyright and all the rest of it. But that's been a big project, and in a way, it's been a kind of archive project about Scottish music, and there is an interest now in Scotland about archiving what Scottish popular music is. There was a massive exhibition in Edinburgh over the past couple of years, and there's been a television series. So the understanding that there is now a body of popular music produced by Scottish artists that's got not just merit in terms of its popularity, but there is maybe something unique about it in the way that there's something unique about Swedish pop music, or but nonetheless that is worthy of documentation and worthy of appraisal and all of that, and to try and understand what it is and what it means. So Classic Scottish Albums, my sort of podcast, has, I think, been part of that discourse.
Yeah, I wish I could see and watch some of those. That would be very interesting. And I'm sure some of those are probably on my list as well, some of those bands and artists, talk a little bit about the All-Star tributes I mentioned in the intro.
So that's, yeah, I mean, that's quite good. That's a good place. And listen, I have to, I'm probably going to be running out of time reasonably shortly, Greg, just to kind of warn you, but
Sure.
happy to do that, and I'm really enjoying this chat. It's interesting that you ask about the broadcasting and then ask about these, because if there's something to maybe sort of thematically bring together for me and my music, I said earlier on when we're talking that I probably most of what I know is self-taught, and it's been a journey to a certain extent in terms of learning about music. And doing the broadcasts is one thing, because you're essentially analysing music, and you're analysing its cultural context, its musical context, and all the rest of it. But Douglas and I together did this series of performances. They're well in the rear view mirror now, I have to say. It's a long time since we've done them. And actually, I'm not sure. Somebody said to me, "Oh, when Burt died, you should do a Burt Bacharach tribute." And I thought, no, it's such a lot of work. But learning how to arrange and perform music by Brian Wilson or Serge Gainsbourg or Ennio Morricone, there is no greater education than that, because I'm not somebody who's going to go and pick up a score out of the music shop and learn how to do it verbatim. I can't read music that well. I have to do it using these, and then I have to, because I was the musical director of those shows, I then have to translate that into something that is understandable for another 7 or 8 musicians. And particularly when it came to Morricone, that was a massive task. But in doing that, you understand the component parts. And you might listen and you might think something is incredibly complex, but you sit there and you say, actually, you know what? It's just an F on the bass underneath a B flat. Okay. Or it's just an E flat chord, but it sounds so mad because it's in contrast to something else that happens before and after it. But actually, if you just get rid of those, it's actually just an E flat. So right. All of that kind of stuff, you're just kind of learning through listening and doing. So probably as part of my own development as a writer, it's been it's as much as the practice of doing it, writing songs, conceiving things and recording them. It's about teaching songwriting, as I do. It's about broadcasting. It's about learning how to decode an Ennio Morricone score for 3 instruments or whatever. And that's where you can learn and you enrich in your own life as a writer. And it's a real privilege to be able to do it.
There you go. Well, you teach on several different levels. You teach through your own music, but then as the lecturer and at the college. So that's got to be really rewarding, like you said. And I know time is short here, but the one thing that always, I did hearing Ennio Morricone, for his spaghetti westerns, that is the image, that is the evocative sound that I correlate, and a lot of people do, with westerns. Hearing that, and then knowing that he came from an Italian,
I know.
And then the movies were shot in Spain, and I believe so it's like you don't have to necessarily be there, here in the United States to write that kind of music. You know,
Mhm.
I mean, yourself, you know, included. I mean, to write the kind of pop that you do, people didn't know any better. They might think that you're American or what have you. You know,
Maybe, yeah, maybe,
it can come from.
maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
I've done a lot of work in Rome. We have a partner. I work for the University of the West of Scotland, and I'm head of arts and media in the School of Business and Creative Industries, and I manage some international partnerships as well as part of my job. So I've spent a lot of time in Rome with our partner there, and for the first 4 years of that partnership, they had their office was next door to Cinecittà.
Okay.
So every time I arrived in Rome, the bus drops you off at Cinecittà, and it's just, you know, and the door, the street from where they were, and that kind of sub Augusta part of the city. When you walk back towards the city, you walk on the Italian sort of Boulevard of Stars.
Oh,
So
wow.
Morricone, Sophia Loren, you know, Marcello Mastroianni, you know.
Yeah, it's all there. Yeah. All right. Well, how many of the books have you read in your personal library behind you there? Have you
All
read
of them.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. Great. All right.
The West Wing
Okay.
is all philosophy, and that's all pulp fiction.
Okay, great. All right. Well, David, I do appreciate you taking the time out and
Thank you.
visiting with me and with the audience. And we will keep in touch, stay in touch, and I'll let you know once this is edited and shoot you over the link, and then you can post it.
I'll share it and make sure that people see it. I'm really appreciative. Thanks for the invite. I've really enjoyed speaking to you, Greg, and thanks again.
All right. We appreciate it, David. And you take care, and all the best to you. All right.
Thank you.
All
Okay.
right.
Thanks now.